Hi, everybody. This is Gene Richards, attorney from the Williams Law Group, and we're back on the Navigating DCPP podcast. The podcast where we break down complex issues involving the Division of Child Protection and Permanency, also known as DCPP. On this episode, we're going to discuss what happens to your kids, your children. We discussed last week about removals, why DCPP removes children, what their burden of proof may be, how they have to go to court to have the court affirm or grant that removal to be appropriate based on there being imminent risk of harm. Well, say you're involved in a removal case and removal has happened, right? DCPP comes to your house. They say, we believe that your children are in imminent risk of harm and we are removing your children today. Well, what happens? What are your rights? How should you respond? Before I get too in-depth as to what happens to children after a removal occurs, I want to remind you all listening out there today that whatever I share in this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship, but we do welcome any person involved with the Child Welfare Agency as DCPP to contact the firm for a confidential consultation with our team. So I want to jump into the first segment of this podcast where I want to discuss with you and help you better understand foster care and kinship placements. First of all, what is foster care? What does that include? Who does that include? So when a child is removed from a home, a family home, and there's no immediate family member available, that child is then placed in a non-relative resource home or foster care. That means that they're staying with a licensed foster care family who's been approved by the state through the Office of Licensing. These families that are licensed resource homes or foster care homes go through training and background checks, and they're supposed to provide a safe and stable home temporarily while this removal is in place, while the case is ongoing. But as you might imagine, and as I understand, it's still incredibly hard for a parent to imagine their child living with a stranger. So how do we avoid that? Say that there is no way to avoid removal. It's happening now, but I want my child to be with somebody I know, with family, with a grandparent, with an uncle or aunt, with somebody that I trust, not some random person in the foster care system. Because let's face it, even though somebody is in foster care or is licensed as a foster home, you don't know them. You don't trust them. There are still concerns you're going to have, obviously. So the preferred option, really for the court as well, and for DCPP at least it should be, is to have a child who's placed outside of the home or who's been removed from the home to be in kinship care, to be with a relative. Now, just so you're aware, kinship can really mean anybody, like even a close family friend, somebody you trust, that you have a relationship with, and your child does as well, most likely. So kinship placements help keep children connected to their family, their community, their sense of belonging. It's more stability. They're with somebody that the family and they know. And DCPP is required to explore those options first. But as you might imagine, that person has to be willing and able to act in that capacity. Also, down the road, the court could perhaps order that custody be returned to you, or there'd be a different placement option depending upon factors and circumstances, and if there's other issues that may arise during the case after the removal happens. So if you know someone who could have your child placed in their care, you got to speak up right away. Tell the caseworker, tell your attorney, hey, I have somebody, my mother, my grandmother, grandparents, my brother, whoever it may be. Tell your worker, the DCPP worker assigned to your case, and your attorney right away, because time matters. If you wait too long, they're going to place your child with somebody who is unknown to you in a non-relative resource home. And you have to try your best to make that not happen, right? We want to have your child in a setting where it's called the least restrictive setting, right? Somewhere they feel comfortable, because if removal has to happen, because unfortunately sometimes removals do happen, and DCPP does have grounds to remove a child from a home. But then it's about what's the next best option. Well, to do with family, right? So it's important to advise the worker, your attorney, immediately about individuals, family members who are willing and able to care for your child. Now, I want to jump into how these placements are decided, right? DCPP and the court can determine where a child should go. This isn't some random placement, and it's not this one-size-fits-all situation. So some factors for the division and the court, for that matter, to consider are the age of the child, having siblings together, right? If you have 2, 3, 4 children or more, it's really important for the kids, the siblings, to reside together if possible. It can depend on cultural or language needs, medical or emotional needs. If there's a diagnosis, autism, things of that nature. There may be homes who have better experience in caring for kids who have those different diagnoses. It could be based on factors like school and ties. Really, it's best to have the children stay in the same school upon being removed. So if there can be a home nearby in the same town or school district, that should be a priority as well. And then, lastly, what we discussed earlier, is there family or kin available and appropriate? And if that relative or close family friend is willing to care for your child temporarily, could they pass a background check and a home inspection? And in those situations, if that person can pass a background check and a home inspection, that family member, that close support, should be the priority. Now, unfortunately, as you might imagine, the system, as is in most situations, is flawed in many ways. First of all, placement is subjective. It's up to DCPP. Now, I know we discussed that the court can weigh in and can perhaps make orders of reconsideration for placement somewhere else, or if there's a concern the court has about being somewhere, to have that addressed or changed on the record. But initially, it's up to DCPP. If they believe it's in a child's best interest to be placed somewhere at a specific home, they make that call. It's up to them. And even if you say, perhaps, I do have family or I do have friends, DCPP might say, well, they're not licensed. They haven't gone through our process. They haven't been vetted. They may have prior DCPP history, or they may have criminal history we don't know about yet, and we can't risk having your child placed in grandmom's home or grandpa's home when we have licensed homes available. Well, you gotta stop right there. As mentioned earlier, it's important to advise the worker and your attorney that you have family, friends who are willing and able to have your child temporarily placed in their care if the removal must happen, right? And you can voice this position to the worker, to your attorney, and advise the division and your attorney to their attorney that this family member can be licensed provisionally, or what you can be deemed as presumptive eligibility. So they may say, well, your grandparents or your parents aren't licensed, so why should we place your child in their home for placement? Well, because they are family, you can voice the idea that, well, they can be licensed provisionally, right? Assume that they are eligible until you hear otherwise. If you then run a background check and they have prior DCPP findings of substantiation or a severe criminal history or whatever else it may be, at that point, okay, well, I guess we'll have to consider Plan B or Plan C or Plan D. But as it stands now, you don't know that they are ruled out. Therefore, temporarily place the children in their care with family. It's important to use that language because I've heard cases where, I actually had a case where a young infant had an unexplained fracture, just an accident where something happened and a child was injured. These things do happen. And of course, DCPP was concerned, oh, there's an injury, must be abuse. So we're concerned. And because we don't know which parent may have caused this injury, although another parent actually did when the case was closed out and came to that conclusion, although we don't know which parent caused the injury, or because we don't know which parent caused the injury, we're concerned about both parents. Mom and dad can't be trusted. So they removed this infant, literally, I believe, under 2 months old, from the parent's home. And when I placed this child, it was just anybody. It's urgent. We'll find, this person's available down, across the street, or not that close really, but somewhere nearby. They're licensed. Let's put the baby there. You don't know them at all, but we'll put them there. And they being DCPP, were so urgent to just have the removal happen, get done their work day, put the child in a different home, and see you in court in 2 days. And it was vital. We said, well, look, client, family, you have to advise them, we have family, and you have to follow the idea that they can be licensed provisionally, presumptive eligibility. And so in that case, when that verbiage, that language was used to the worker and to the supervisor from DCPP, it was like, oh, you know what? That is a thing. You're right. We do have to consider that there is family available. And although that family member doesn't have their home at this time licensed, we can presume that if they went through the process, they'd be good to go. Because this is a temporary situation. This isn't someone who's trying to be a long-term foster care home or have other children in their home. This is a grandparent, family, a close friend stepping up to temporarily care for a child or children. And so by knowing what, as you might say, buzzwords to use, by knowing how to say things, how to present things, this allows for the client to get really in this situation almost the best case scenario, right? And of course, these are cases where the removal is imminent. There's no way around it. It's happening, right? And at that point, you have to consider, well, what's the best second option? That's having your child with someone you know and trust, like your own parents or your siblings or somebody else you know and trust very well. And so by advising the division, hey, I know I have rights. I know I have options. It's not up to you solely. By advising the workers, these workers sometimes, as you might imagine, they don't know how everything works. Maybe they're untrained or not trained very well or new or used to the old way of doing things. Who knows what they know? And so it's important for you to know your rights and for you to know what to say. Because in these situations, if you don't advise the worker of your options, they may tell you, you have no options. It's up to us where your child goes. We're having your child go to a placement 2 hours away with somebody you don't know and will never meet. And that's your only option. That's not true because the system's flawed in other ways too. I'll get to the foster care system, right? Licensing, having resource homes licensed and available to have children placed in their homes. Well, unfortunately, it's sad but true. Not every foster home, resource home is actually safe. So it's important to have your child in a place, if removed, that you feel is safe and that you know that they will be okay when they are there for a couple of days or perhaps even more based on how the case progresses because it could be a very long-term placement. So it's important that your child is placed somewhere they are safe with someone you trust. And unfortunately, not every resource home, not every foster home that's non-relative, that you don't know, that you can't trust, can be trusted. Things unfortunately do happen. People have a way to beat the system, to get licensed when maybe they should not have been licensed, to pass a test, to pass an inspection, whatever else it might be. And really also, after being licensed, things can change. People can change. Maybe it's not a safe home anymore. Maybe somebody else is in the home that DCPP is not aware of. And so different factors lead to a non-relative resource home, a foster home, a home you're not aware of, where it's not actually a safe place for your child to be. So it's important to immediately voice your position, your options to DCPP so that if your child is removed from your care, at least you know your child's safe with somebody you know and trust. As always, I want to thank you all for listening to the podcast just to gain knowledge and insight into DCPP and how they work. We discussed what happens after a removal, right? If DCPP comes in and removes a child, well, where does that child go? A resource home or what's called a foster home, relative versus non-relative, how to ensure your child's in a safe place with somebody you know and trust. It's just important to know that you do have options because unfortunately, the worker won't tell you these things all the time, if ever. They'll tell you it's their way or that's the only other option you have. It's plan A and plan A only. They're plan only, which is not accurate. You have the option to present a placement option, to present names and people for consideration. Division's supposed to consider families first. So ensure that you voice that position. You use the correct language to let them know you have those rights to ensure that your child, if removed, is placed in an appropriate home, at least, hopefully only temporarily. So I ask you all, as always, to subscribe and share this podcast, this series with friends, family, because again, it's important for family and friends to know how this process works. If you don't know your rights will unfortunately be violated. That's just how the process works. Not knowing how things works tends to be an avenue for others to take advantage of that situation and lack of knowledge. If you want other resources or support, you can check out our website, give us a call. We'd be happy to have a consultation to help you in a case, whether it be an investigation or a court case with DCPP. We're always here and ready and happy to assist you in those matters. Now, next week, we're going to be discussing inside the courtroom, right? A lot happens before you actually go to court with DCPP. In fact, some cases can go from beginning to end without being in court. But in a removal case, you're always going to be inside the courtroom eventually, really, as I said before, within 48 hours or 2 court days. So we have a removal, an emergent removal called a daughter removal. You then have the options of placement, right? Family home, non-family home. Well, once placement is made, you're going to be in court to figure out, is that removal justified? If not, child comes back home. If it is, well, what has to happen next? So we're going to discuss on next week's episode what happens inside the courtroom. Until then, have a great week. We'll see you soon.